348 days. That's how long it took Nintendo to remember that the Nintendo Entertainment System was part of the Nintendo Classics app. That's right, for the first time since they uploaded Tetris back in December, 8-bit NES games are coming to the Nintendo Switch Online. I'm talking about beat-em-up classic Battletoads and Ninja Gaiden 2: The Dark Sword of Chaos, as well as Bionic Commando and Icarus of Myths and Monsters on the Game Boy. Yeah, that's exciting news. But are either of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, GamePro, Nintendo Power, and more classic magazines that reviewed these games back when they first came out. So gas up that speeder bike because we're about to go sewer racing in this massive new episode of Nintendo Classics Review Crew. One year after Ninja Gaiden laid the groundwork for a future filled with cinematic video games, the sequel arrived with more of what made the first game so damn good. I'm talking about bigger levels, better power-ups, more cinemas, and a story that somehow topped the original. It introduces some of the franchise's best characters and gives us an even worse baddie to contend with. It hints at a more complicated power struggle between the villains, and has one of the greatest endings of all time. This truly was the sequel that fans had been waiting for, but were the critics impressed? Let's go ahead and start with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who opted not to review the first game back in 1989. Ed gushed that The Dark Sword of Chaos is probably the best sequel ever made, with near-perfect graphics, challenging gameplay, and intermissions which entice you to always go round further. Other than the difficult gameplay and higher levels, Ninja Gaiden 2 is as good as an action game can get. Oddly enough, the only EGM critic to not give the game a 9 out of 10 was their own resident ninja Sushi X. There's no denying the fact that Ninja Gaiden 2 is a superb game. It outdoes the original in nearly every department. It's addictive, and the intermissions and story are terrific. Using the same bosses that were in the first game is a letdown, but it's still worth the price of admission. EGM gave Ninja Gaiden 2 an average score of 8.75 out of 10. Now, would you believe that EGM's score actually put them at the bottom of the review scale? It's true, the reviews only go up from here. For example, Video Games and Computer Entertainment gave Ninja Gaiden 2 a score of 9 out of 10 in their 17th issue. Titles like Ninja Gaiden are proof that video games are learning how to evoke players' emotions and entertain just like a movie or TV show can. These adventures go beyond the confines of video game gimmickry. In fact, I wouldn't hesitate to call it a legitimate art form. That may be a lofty position for game designers to aspire to, particularly since the average NES owner is not yet in high school. But quality doesn't hurt, and Tecmo knows it. Ninja Gaiden 2 is a winner, and it's got my vote for one of the best NES carts ever. Highly recommended. If you're curious who gave Ninja Gaiden 2 the highest grade, that magazine was Nintendo Power, who went all the way up to a 4.7 out of 5. That makes it the second best reviewed game of 1990, right behind Castlevania 3. Unfortunately, this was an era of Nintendo Power where they didn't actually publish a written review with their scores, so we're never going to know what made them go that high. Instead, I'd like to point out that Game Players magazine ended up giving the game an award for NES Excellence, while it earned Electronic Gaming Monthly's Best Ending in a Game award in their 15th issue. While there may not be a lot of reviews, the few that covered Ninja Gaiden 2 loved it. I mean, just look at the way that Video Games and Computer Entertainment covered it, practically comparing it to the Mona Lisa or Citizen Kane. It's really the beginning of critics making the argument that video games are more than just a children's toy. With an average score of 91%, this truly was one of the best reviewed games on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and one of the greatest sequels ever made. With a likable hero and a story firmly planted in Greek mythology, you would think that Kid Icarus would be one of Nintendo's top-tier franchises. And yet, with only 3 games spread across a quarter century, things did not work out for Pit and his Angel Land friends. To their credit, Nintendo did attempt a Game Boy sequel in 1991, the exact same year that they gave us a handheld Metroid 2. But while Nintendo's science fiction-themed horror series managed to pick up momentum going into the 16-bit generation, Kid Icarus, of Myths and Monsters, ended up stalling the franchise for more than 20 years. Was that because it was a bad game? Or is this a true classic that was unfairly overshadowed by a year filled with top-tier Nintendo games? Let's turn to the critics and see if we can get some answers. You know how I just mentioned that 1991 was a year full of big releases? Well, there were so many big hitters that most of your favorite magazines didn't even bother to review this game. There are no scores from Electronic Gaming Monthly, or Computer and Video Games, or even Video Games and Computer Entertainment. So, with no anchor, what we're going to do is we're going to start at the bottom and just work our way up, with Total leading the charge. Giving the game a 68%, they complained that the graphics are too samey and lacked surprises, while at the same time the audio is annoying and the length won't hold your attention for very long. A fairly engaging little platformer, but it's a bit repetitive. Persistence extends its lifespan, but you'll get bored before you get stuck. Now, to be fair to young Pit, Nintendo Power did like the game a little bit more, giving it a 3.5 out of 5. Across the pond in the UK, Nintendo Magazine System went one tick higher, giving Kid Icarus a 71%. However, the biggest score, at least from a numbers perspective, comes from Ace and their ridiculous 1,000-point scale. Giving of Myths and Monsters a score of 788, they concluded that it doesn't look too hot, but things soon perk up once you get into it. If anything, Kid Icarus reminds me of a poor man's Turrican, with an equally massive and addictive challenge. But for all the game's size, it's not that hard. It should only take a couple of hours or so to win the first treasure. While the difficulty does prevent frustration from setting in, it does hint that it isn't going to take that long to finish the game, especially with the battery-backed up save positions. As we continue our ascent on Mount Olympus, we see GamePro give Kid Icarus 2 a score of 4 out of 5. As shocking as it sounds, GameZone of all magazines stopped being clinically insane just long enough to give this game a shockingly high score of 91%. If you thought Neighbors at its prime was addictive, it has nothing on this. A crowbar won't prise you away from it. The graphics are fab, and it's challenging without being too easy. It's not too hard either, and it won't make you want to leave it under a steamroller going downhill at 90 miles per hour. Yeah, I bet you didn't have Australian soap opera Neighbors on your bingo card. With an overall average of just 78%, Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters was one of Nintendo's lower scoring games in 1991. The critics liked it for the most part, but judging from the reviews, it's just not that surprising that Nintendo went on to prioritize Metroid, The Legend of Zelda, and basically every other franchise. Give it a shot now that it's on the Switch, it's still pretty good. Although it started out as a 1987 arcade cabinet, The Bionic Commando that everybody loves and remembers is the vastly different and vastly improved version that was on the Nintendo Entertainment System, which took the basic concept and really fleshed it out in a big way. 4 years later, Capcom decided to remake that NES game for the black and white Game Boy, giving us a mostly faithful rendition on the small screen. Now I say mostly because Capcom made some interesting choices, like giving this version a more futuristic story and setting. Let's see if that change had an effect on how the critics felt in 1992. We're going to kick things off with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who is once again right in the middle of the review scale. As it turns out, this version of Bionic Commando was so good that even the Game Boy hating Sushi X gave it a 7 out of 10. Ah, poo, I love this game! Everyone has forgotten the excellent NES game until now, when you can take it on the road. No offense, Capcom, but Nintendo had better get in gear soon and release a color Game Boy, because colorful titles like Bionic Commando get hacked on that tiny black and white screen. Martin liked the game even more than Such, giving it a 9 and proclaiming that this is one of the best Game Boy carts I've played in a long time. The graphics and music are very good. The gameplay is absolutely phenomenal and captures all the best aspects of the classic NES game. Plenty of tough action and technique throughout. If a Game Boy cart can be this good, then bring on the Super NES version. Unfortunately, we didn't get a 16-bit version, but this Game Boy port still managed to average an impressive 8 out of 10 from EGM. Now it turns out the Nintendo Power also liked the game, but not quite as much as EGM. They gave Bionic Commando a score of 3.9 out of 5. Now if you're looking for the lowest score, then that honor goes to Electronic Games, who reviewed the Game Boy port in their very first issue. Giving it a 75%, they argued that playing Bionic Commando on the Game Boy is like watching a dog dance. Fido may not boogie like Gene Kelly, but it's impressive that the animal can stand at all. Forget the graphics, this type of game simply does not travel well outside of the large screen multiverse. On-screen characters are so small, for example, that eye strain is likely to afflict players old enough to vote. The situation is not helped by the strong blurring that occurs, as with all action titles for the Game Boy, whether Rad Spencer moves left or right at full speed. Bionic Commando represents a type of game that will never function at full power on a handheld system like the Game Boy. Given that limitation, it's a skilled reproduction in miniature of yet another side-scrolling video game. Okay, Fido, now let's see you moonwalk. Moving back up the scale, we see Nintendo Magazine System checking in with an impressive 84%, while Super Gamer went all the way up to a 91% in their debut issue. The highest score comes from, you guessed it, GamePro, who yet again handed out a perfect 5 out of 5. Bionic Commando breaks the side-scrolling running gun malaise with exciting undercover intrigue, awesome sci-fi style weaponry, and outrageous bionic arm maneuvers. As radical as this game is, Spencer is no Agent 007. But then again, James Bond never had the guts to volunteer for wiry wall-grabbing arm implants. However, you do, right? Commandeer a copy of Bionic Commando and let her rip. Honestly, that's good advice, because Bionic Commando on the Game Boy is great. Do I prefer the NES version? Sure. But I also like seeing the changes that were made for this black and white version. And the critics seem to dig it too, as the overall average lands at 85%. The critics were genuinely impressed that Capcom was able to fit this game on a tiny screen.
Wire action masterせよ ヒットラーの復活
The Battletoads are no stranger to the Nintendo Classics app, Over the last year or two, we've not only seen them become battle maniacs on the Super NES, but also team up with Billy and Jimmy Lee in Battletoads Double Dragon. But while those were certainly a nice appetizer that hinted at the greatness of the franchise, what we've all been waiting for is the main course, the original 1991 Battletoads on the Nintendo Entertainment System. This was a massive 8-bit release at a time when everybody was paying attention to the 16-bit console war. And let me tell you, the Battletoads, they weren't just liked, they were beloved by the critics, with basically every magazine raving about the graphics, the animation, and the variety of playstyles. Look, if you only know this game for its brutally challenging driving levels, then you're really missing out on one of the best 8-bit games of all time. And just to prove that it's not just me saying that, we're going to start with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who ended up giving Battletoads the lowest score of any English language magazine, a 9 out of 10. That's right, we're starting with a 90% and we're working our way up. Martin called the game awesome, awesome, awesome. Amazing graphics and animation will blow you away. Best of all, the game is extremely fun to play, a quality that's hard to find on any system. With new concepts and techniques on each level, the Toads almost got a 10. Sushi X agreed. Excellent, radical, most triumphant. If Battletoads doesn't make you laugh at the hysterical animations or fry your brain cells with utter amazement, you are reading the wrong magazine. The amount of work that went into this game is phenomenal. This'll make up for Double Dragon. Now, just a reminder that the Double Dragon that Sushi X was bashing was actually EGM's first ever Game of the Year, just 24 issues ago. Speaking of which, Battletoads earned EGM's prize for the Best Nintendo Game of the Year and Most Challenging Video Game of the Year in their 1991 award show. Now, there were other magazines that gave Battletoads the exact same score. Nintendo Power went with a 4.5 out of 5, while Video Games and Computer Entertainment went with their standard 9 out of 10. Computer and Video Games went one tick higher with a 91%, while Total went up to a 92%. They praised the great characters, excellent animation, and superb backgrounds, and loved that every level is like a brand new game. It's absolutely gorgeous. They called it an amazing looking arcader that sets standard, breaks molds, and does a lot of other groovy things too. It's the best blast I've had in a long time. Now, Mean Machines went even higher, going all the way up to a 93%. And then there is, of course, GamePro, who once again went with a perfect 5 out of 5. Battletoads is a monster. 16-bit game systems making you nervous about the longevity of your humble NES? Well, if NES carts to come can be this good and this much fun, you can hold off on that upgrade a while longer. With scores that range from 90% all the way up to 100%, Battletoads really is one of the best reviewed Nintendo Entertainment System games of all time. In fact, with an overall average of 92%, Battletoads is only behind Super Mario Bros. 3 and Tecmo Bowl as the top-rated NES game on the Nintendo Classics app. Like I said, the critics loved Battletoads, and while it is a little bit challenging from time to time, I think you're gonna dig it.
It's Jeff's Video Game Review!
Okay, last week Harley and I reviewed Ultra Enviroman.
Whack to the curb.
It has got to go. So today, we're gonna take a look at Battletoads.
Rocket!
That it is, I mean, they got Psycho Pigs and Turbo Thwacking.
And with kick fighting, surfing, babe saving,
how can you go wrong? Your kid's a freak for Battletoads and these other games from Trade West, Nintendo Entertainment, or Game Boy systems required.
Alright, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. We have a whole playlist with every single game on the Nintendo Classics app. So, give it a watch while you're out on holiday this week. Now, here's the question I have for you. Did Kid Icarus deserve better? Back in 1991, Kid Icarus and Metroid were kind of in the same place. Well, one of them went on to become this classic franchise, and the other, Well, the other one had a DS game that absolutely murdered your hand. Should Nintendo have done more with this franchise? Let me know in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back later this week with more stuff. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.